Start the recording now.
Okay. And then was there like a survey thing that was going to happen at the beginning or?
Yeah, she's doing, I think she's still doing the poll on the original one.
Okay. Great. So should I start now or should I wait a little bit longer for?
Um, I think you should be good to start now.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so hello everybody. And again, apologies for this technical issue. I have not had that happen before, and been using Zoom a lot. So I just updated, so I wonder if that might be part of the issue. So let me share my screen. I'm looking very pink right now because I have two monitors, and let's see here. Okay, great. Then let me move this over so I can see everyone. And then let me grab the chat. Oh, there we go. Okay. So as I'm going through things, feel free to use the chat to check in. If you have questions, I'll try to keep track of it, and then hopefully my co-hosts can help alert me if something is coming up. So today we're going to go over selecting a platform. Last week we were looking at this idea of crafting a story and wanting to create a portfolio that was really driven by a story and the story of your work, and also you as a creative person, a maker, an artist, a designer. So there's lots of different kind of subcategories within this like creative umbrella. And so we were looking at thinking about telling that story throughout the entire portfolio, and not just keeping it as just like part of the about section. So we wanted to craft a story, look at the story of your work, look at the story of you as a creative, and then use that to drive the architecture and the user experience of the portfolio. So we talked about the 3 C's. I didn't realize there are 3 C's at the time, but I just realized that there are. So we have the contents. So that's going to be the work that you have for the portfolio. We have the container, and that's going to be the platform essentially that is holding those contents. And then you also have the communication. So what parts of the container are also telling a story, and that includes both the style of the container, the different style elements, the actual visual components of the container. So whatever template you're working with, the fonts that you're using on your portfolio. It also involves the architecture. So the way that users might navigate through that space, and then you're able to put a lot of design and intentional crafting of that architecture as well. So that's that kind of third element. It's a little bit less tangible, I guess, or concrete than the work and then the container. So that's what we were talking about a little bit more conceptually last week. So I had a series of propositions, and this one is the idea that story is as important as creative content when it comes to your portfolio and telling the story of your work and the story of you as a creator. And then we have this concept of story-driven architecture. And again, that is the architecture is how a viewer or a user might navigate that space of your portfolio. What are they seeing first? How are you guiding that journey? And so less about this, where we kind of look at those things, these 3 elements separately. So you have the framing, the visual design of the portfolio, you have your own work, and then you have the story, and thinking about it as kind of these separate elements that have some overlap, but it's a very small amount of overlap when you approach it that way. So then I propose this different approach where it's almost like nesting dolls, where you have the story and the narrative that's kind of shaping the architecture and the framing, of the platform. And then that is also shaping the way that people are going to approach your work. And there was a question at the very end of last week's workshop that I forgot to address, and it was just asking, well, where do we put the story into the portfolio? And I think that it's important to think about it less as a specific section, and you want to be thinking about your story, thinking about how all elements of the portfolio tell that story, and it can be in very small ways. But all those things combined, that's going to communicate your narrative kind of more cohesively or completely throughout the entire site as folks are navigating through it. So this was also what I was asking folks to do for this week, just thinking about the storyboard, how you imagine a viewer or a user navigating through the portfolio, and what types of work you want to show them first, what information you want to show them first. And that can help you when you start thinking about the actual navigation. And also it can help you kind of narrow down what types of templates and potentially even what platforms you end up using. So there was a couple of potential structures. We have a very linear structure where there's very little choice on the user's side. We have a very open structure where the user has lots of choices. And then I was proposing this, this is potentially the most effective structure where there is some choice involved, but there's also a series of branching narrative options for users to take. So you're thinking about different potential like storylines essentially for users to take. They still have the ability to navigate things and kind of jump around, but you're also giving them some pathways. So now we're going to start talking about these actual platforms a little bit more. And before we go into portfolio specifics, I just want to talk a little bit about how web design has kind of shifted the way that we read websites and the way that we interact with online media, essentially the internet. It's really changed in the last 15, even 10 years, and definitely in the last 20 years. And that really impacts potentially some of the choices that you are going to make regarding your portfolio. So when the web was first invented, I guess not first invented, but when people started having more access to web media and people were starting to be able to author things, and that was kind of late 90s, early 2000s, and going into basically like 2008, 2010. And that is, there was a big kind of emphasis on the capabilities of websites, the capabilities of like interactive media, the ability to author interactive media. And so there was this really interesting kind of focus on the site form and the function. So the interfaces were really evident and really obvious. They were very complex in some ways. It was always like, oh, this is like this new menu system, or this is this new way of doing galleries or slideshows, or we're going to have all this animation in here. You had some really unique and novel forms. So websites were very, there was a huge variety of websites, but they were really built more around their capabilities, and I think a little bit less around the content that they were presenting. So when you were, and this was something that when you're working with portfolio sites, and this, this was from a personal standpoint, an individual standpoint, onto like studios and really like larger industry, like design companies, their websites that show their work, any kind of creative company, the websites would be so complicated and so complex. And there would be like animated like menus, like systems, and like it just so many, like it was really interesting. But a lot of those companies and a lot of that approach was looking more at what you could do with the technology and a little bit less about the work and the content that was being shown. And so that was across the web. You had, product sites for things that had nothing to do with like design or art, and they were still like very complex. And it was really kind of about that novelty of suddenly we're able to create these kind of playable media structures. So we're going to kind of overcomplicate and over design every single site because we can. And this was something that was not really possible before that point. And so I think, and also a big thing that shifted this was the kind of introduction of mobile technologies and needing to simplify those from like a practical standpoint, but also just like technological standpoint. And so then at that point, trying to get a website to also work on like the first generation of an iPhone, it definitely needed to be a lot more simplified and a lot more straightforward. And so that has kind of steered the focus on site design from focusing on all the kind of bells and whistles to being a more content centered, because you want to be able to focus on the content and be able to communicate that first. And so that's why I was saying that shift kind of started happening around 2008, because you were looking at the like iPhones and mobile technology happened right around then. The first iPhone I think came out in like 2009, maybe 2008. But that's where all of a sudden you see this shift to more streamlined sites, more kind of transparent UX, UI designs, where there's a lot of design that goes into those interfaces, but it's not over designed, and it's really meant to allow the content to shine through. And then you also start to see these standard forms and formats. Like in the early 2000s, using a template was like, oh, you would never do that. And even when you were working with things like MySpace and social media and templates that allowed you to more easily create a web page without knowing how to code, a big draw with a lot of those templates was like, we have this unique template. You're only going to be the one person. There's only like 20 people who have access to this template. And that's really changed, because now it's less about having a really unique site design, and there are kind of these standards that we have now for looking at web media. So I like to kind of think about it like, when you're thinking about the container or something. So this is like my two ice cream containers. And this is kind of the way I think about like early 2000s web design, where like the container that you were putting the content into kind of was the focus. And then there was less focus on the content itself. So it was a little bit overcomplicated, because it was like, we suddenly could make these amazing things. And you really wanted, and people were really striving to have things be really unique in those designs. And there's definitely some amazing ideas that came out of those designs, but those have been a lot more standardized and accepted. And we have a little bit more of a clear kind of visual language that we're working with web media now. So we're able to focus back on the content now that we have the technology a little bit more figured out. And then if you just joined, can you just make sure to mute, or just check and see that you're muted? So we're getting I'm hearing some kind of background noise. Okay. So that was just a little general look at how web design has shifted and how it's become a little bit, it's kind of focused back onto the content now. And so it's something to keep in mind when you're so I want to go over some of the different platforms that are available, and just talk about just some of the different elements and components. And these are all things to consider when you're deciding on a platform. So These are very basic categories. Of course, there is always a little bit of overlap, but I tried to kind of separate them. So we have just straight up HTML, CSS, JavaScript authored site. So these are things that allow you to be completely customized. You can design it. If you can code it, you can design whatever you want. It allows you to have the highest level of control over style and navigation and just general designs. The drawback with this is that it is, you're doing all that work, and if you are not really skilled with coding, it can take it's just basically having to learn a totally new skill in order to have this, to be able to create these sites. And there are definitely some people that work with HTML and CSS and understand it, and still choose to work with different templates and frameworks, because it's just so much easier to update things. So unless you are a web developer or like a web product engineer, I would not recommend this, even if you have some knowledge. So then we have the very basic CMS template, and CMS is a content management system. So it's essentially allows you to, there's some kind of framework where you have kind of like the back end of a site, and you're able to plug images in or content in on the back end. And then it can take that, the CMS takes that content and then populates it into a template. And it's also a framework. So this is something like WordPress, where you have some layouts and functions are automated. So you're not having to code out every single time you want to replace an image or program a gallery. You have a lot of those things automated, and you still have a high control over the style and navigation. But there is still a lot of coding that can go into that. And it's also with WordPress, there are a lot of templates out there, but it's very decentralized. So you have, there isn't like one repository for all those templates, and you can get them from, multiple sources. So then there's a lot more variety with the templates. There's a lot of things that you can do. There just isn't the same kind of standardized designs and options that you're going to see with these higher level CMS frameworks. So going into there, so these are the ones, these high level CMS templates and platforms. They're kind of the drag and drop. You're getting the templates usually from a centralized source. So most things like layouts and functions within layouts, so like adding videos, working with background images, making changes to template designs, adding in image galleries, those are all things that are totally automated. So it's less, you don't have to really work with code at all. And you're kind of working with more of a drag and drop interface. You have moderate control over styles and navigation systems. And there's also like different levels of control within these different options, which I'm going to go into a little bit more later on. And so with these, this is like Squarespace, Wix, Cargo, and Adobe Portfolio. So you have overall less variety of templates to work with, but they're all coming from these companies. So they all are a little bit more solid in terms of their design. They're a little bit more standardized. You have support built in with them. It's a little bit harder to make lots of changes to the templates, but it's also a lot easier to implement changes and to work with lots of content. And then you have kind of platform social hybrids. And so that is things like ArtStation, DeviantArt, Behance, Dribbble, And these are these kind of like combinations of like a authoring platform, but then it's also like a social media platform. And with most of those, you know, you're uploading things the same way that everybody does who's working with the platform. And you just have less control, way less control over the look and feel of the container essentially. So there are some, like I think ArtStation has some predefined templates that you can work with, but it's pretty usually they're like it's like pretty standardized across, and it's pretty set to the branding of the platform versus the branding of the individual users. And the reason why these are also these are just not totally in the social side is because they're really meant they come with a social community, which is great, but they are also focusing on creative work. So there are some ways to kind of customize things or to build in a little bit of your story into the system, but it's still mostly kind of branded again to the platform itself and not to each user. And then you have just the purely social platforms. So everything is automated, but there's little to no control over the style and the navigation. And so that's things like Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube. Obviously, the content that you're putting in, you can always change up, but you can't, you know, change the way that Instagram is going to function. You can't change the navigation in Instagram. And so that's where you're really tied to the platform and the platform's decisions and branding. So when you're thinking about which platform to use, there's a couple levels of criteria that I suggest. So these are kind of the most important things that I have people think about when they're deciding between different platforms. So you want to think about how it fits to your narrative. Look at that storyboard that you made. Think about the navigation that it requires, and then make sure that platform kind of allows for that. You want to think about the type of work you have. So obviously, if you have a lot of video or you have a lot of audio, you want to make sure to choose a platform that allows you to embed video or audio files. If you have a lot of images, you want to be, of course, working with a platform that gives you a lot of gallery options and allows you to upload a lot of images. Template quality and variety. So you definitely want to look at what's available, and you want to think about the design of those templates and just their flexibility. I tend to think that having a larger variety can be really helpful because depending upon the way that you're kind of, if you have like a cohesive style for your work, then the more templates there are, the better chances you have of finding one that fits your work well and complements your work well. You want to think about the ease of customization, ease of editing. And these are kind of tied. Usually if something is easier to customize, then it can be a little bit more complex to update content too. The community that's involved with each of these different platforms, and then how much support there is from the platform itself. So things like Wix and Squarespace, they have built-in platform support, so you can get help from Squarespace, but then they also have communities of users. WordPress is a really good example of this, where WordPress, there isn't really a centralized hub. I mean, there is if you're paying for certain templates, but there's huge communities of just WordPress users where you can also find support. And then the responsive and like liquid abilities of a site, and this is how easy it is to go from computer designs to mobile. So some platforms, it's just automated and you have to do very little adjustments. And then some you have to, once you have kind of how it looks on one device, you have to then kind of set a whole other set of designs for how it shifts to mobile. So that's definitely something you want to look at and test out when you're deciding on this. And then pricing, I have this like listed on level 1. I think it also is level 2. I mean, I think that having free options is important in terms of accessibility, especially. This is, I think, an area though where it's, I think, important to invest in having a little bit more access or support, or like your own domain name, not having ads on a portfolio site, I think is really important. So none of these platforms are like significantly, there's not a huge significant difference in price between these. And it is also something to think about, like the free versions of things, there's definitely drawbacks to those. And so one thing I recommend folks, if there is a cost issue, is to just work with the free version. And then once you start, if you're starting to apply to jobs, to then kind of upgrade. So you're able to have that, because it does appear a little bit more professional as with some of the features. And then level 2 criteria, just these are things like domain name options. These are like kind of other things you want to think about, how easy it is to add on your own domain name, how much more expensive that might be. The digital community especially with these different platforms, like how many of the users kind of gather together. The social media integration options, that can be really important if you have a really strong social media presence already. So a couple of the platforms work a little bit better. And then there are also some platforms that like have agreements with other social media companies. So you just want to kind of look at how those types of things can be hooked up. Some people, if you don't have a social media presence that you want to be a part of your portfolio site, then this doesn't really matter. You want to think about the kind of the user side of things, the UX UI. It is important. And like thinking about the ease of use from the user standpoint, the platform branding, that can definitely play in. You can definitely start to kind of recognize these different templates, and that like different platforms will definitely kind of their libraries of templates, they're looking at their own style guide as well. So some platforms are kind of have a different style than other platforms, and so that might be something that kind of overall will influence your story a little bit. So you just want to make sure that your story and then the platform branding isn't in direct opposition. You just want to make sure that they're kind of working together. And then commerce options, and this is just for the portfolio side of things. Obviously, if you are wanting to sell your work, then that should be like a level 1. But there are some platforms that have commerce kind of built in, or it's like you're able to kind of add it on for a slightly different price. And so that is, that's a really good thing to consider, especially if you're thinking about selling your work. Again, if you're not at all, then you don't need to worry about it. But it can be good to know that there's an option. Now let me, I just need to, let's see here. I just need to add Taylor. Give me 1 second, everybody, sorry. Okay. Okay, great. So then there's also some things to think about when you're selecting templates. And so this is after you have chosen a platform, you're going to get into selecting a template, but then it's kind of like the snake eating its tail, where sometimes working with the different templates within the platform, that might influence overall what platform you end up choosing. So I have these both up here before we get into the platforms themselves, because working with the templates and then finding a template that fits your work and your story is really important. So there are, this might be the most important thing. If you have a platform that you want to use for all these different options, but then there's a template that fits your work so much better on another platform, it might be important to switch over, because this is really key to allowing your work and your story to be able to shine through. So here's just some strategies. First, before you even start thinking about the visual and the architecture of the template, you want to go back to that storyboard. Think about how that storyboard translates into navigation. Think about the type and the style of your work. Think about what you have to put into the site. Are you going to be working with more text, less image, and less media? Or is it more images, more media, less text? Because that also, you don't want to choose a super image heavy template and then not have images to be able to input in it. And there's a lot of templates that work more with text and have less areas for images. And so if you don't have a lot of banner images, or if you don't have like background images, then that you might want to work with something that is a little bit more minimal and a little bit more focused on text. If you have a lot of visuals to work with, and you have things like banner images, you have like a logo, you have background photos that you've taken, that's where maybe you want to work with something that's a little bit more image driven. And another thing that I do, and I recommend folks when you're thinking about templates and platforms, you want to be able to input and plug in your own content and your own work. So and this can be something where you don't want to have all of your work organized and then try to find a template that fits that work perfectly. But you also don't want to choose a template and then be like, oh no, now I have to like make my work fit into this template. So you want to be working with the two things kind of at the same time. And so what I do is I just create like some quick banners, backgrounds, work samples, and media. I just kind of plug them in to these templates. So just having some examples of sample work of my work and just see how it looks in these templates, because most of the templates that we're going to look at and the platforms that we look at, their templates come preloaded with other images. And it can be really important to see how your work, even if it's just like just a few elements, just see how that kind of works with the template. And so I usually recommend, like, even if it's just like 5 or 6 images, seeing how that starts to look in all these different templates. And that is, so you're wanting to think about the work, the platform, and the navigation. Those are all connected. Okay, and let me see here. I'm going to quickly just show a little bit more what I'm talking about with this sample sample, shoot, uh-oh. Well, actually, I think I can go into this. Okay. I think I need to, okay, this is what's happening. Desktop. Okay. Okay. So now we have the desktop. Okay. So Squarespace is the platform that I work with the most. And I tend to, so I don't want my own personal biases or preferences to influence everybody. So I'm trying to show the different approaches. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about why I do work with Squarespace a little bit more. And so Squarespace has like an excellent template selection, and there's a lot of support built in from the platform. It has, to me, the easiest drag and drop interface. So updating sites, it's really easy. It feels really intuitive. And then all the templates, there's very little redesign that has to happen when you're switching from the desktop view to the mobile view. And so Squarespace, they're generating all their templates themselves. They're all coming from Squarespace. And so they're kind of pre-programmed to be very, very responsive, and it's very, very smooth. There's usually, sometimes with some templates, there's like a couple of settings you have to adjust. But it's the ability for them to go from desktop to mobile. I think it's very effective, and the designs look great on mobile too. So the drawbacks with Squarespace, it is probably the most expensive of the paid platforms, and it has the most rigid template designs. So it's a lot harder to customize their templates. And it's also especially harder to kind of like customize single pages within their templates. You're able to change the layouts, but the things like the design styles that are applied to pages and certain options like dates, like on a blog, or like galleries, like the formats and the ways that the images go through. There aren't a lot of ways, to easily customize those. So it is pretty rigid. And I think part of that is because they have to make, because these things are so responsive, it's pretty baked in terms of like the template design. There isn't an easy way to migrate a site or to back it up, and that is kind of a big issue with Squarespace, and also a lot of these higher level CMS platforms. And there isn't any free option. There's a trial option, but if you want your site to be client facing, then there is no free option. And so I want to, let me skip out of this. Let's see here. Just going to see if I can switch. Okay. So can people see the actual Squarespace?
Yes.
Okay, great. And let me grab my chat window again. Okay. So this is Squarespace, and just going to go in to, so I have a lot of sites here. And I just want to show some of these things that I'm talking about. Where I want to create website. So, and this is what I was talking about with the platform branding. Squarespace has a pretty strong branding when it comes to the templates that they have available. And I found that that can be nice because I personally like their design, and I think that it's it is very cohesive. And then I also think that it's minimal enough that it can complement a lot of different types of work. So you can just go through the different lists of templates. They definitely have less templates than some other platforms, but they have a lot of different types. And again, the quality of the template is very, very high. So you would just choose one of these. And then all right, and then they do little walkthroughs, and this is another thing, like the support. They're able to, they have a lot of support built in, and they do kind of show you how to walk through these different interfaces. But this is what essentially the back end looks like, and this is also something that you'll see that's similar across a lot of these platforms, where you have different pages, and this is where you're able to play with the navigation and decide, what kind of menu systems you want. And then you can also decide, with these pages, especially with the scrolling ones, you're able to determine a lot of what the user is going to see on the first page. So you're able to add pages, change the name of menus, and this is where you're going to be putting in your content. And so you can, and then when you start to work with the actual adjustment of the content, this is what it looks like. You go through the edit, and then the way that most of these templates within Squarespace work is that they're working with this kind of essentially modules, where you're just adding different blocks. So you have a text block here, and then you come down, and then you're able to add another text block or an image block or a gallery block. So you have all these different types of media essentially and content containers that you can insert. And it's all just kind of, it's just essentially kind of stacking with these different blocks. And so I have my starter pack here. And so I have some sample work. And so this is what I was saying about, plugging in your own work and seeing how it's going to look in these sites, and making sure that it's, the things are going together. So if you have a really strong visual style, then you definitely want to you don't want to choose a template that also has a very strong style, because those two styles might be in conflict with one another. If you're working with something that's really minimal, then if you have designs that are really minimal, then you probably also do not want to have like a really flashy site, a really bright site. So you definitely want these things to complement each other. And then this is also, I mean, one of the harder things with these sites is that they come preloaded with work. And so sometimes it can be really hard to visualize how the site's going to look with your work. So that's why just, really quickly, just starting to add in these things and see how these things can start, how the template will fit together with just some sample images. So these can be things that you have created for class or projects, and just to have a sense of how your work fits into the visual style of the template. And that can be before you even start thinking about adding in pages. So this is just trying to see like how this all might fit together. So the other kind of responsive element that I was talking about, you can test that out with these, where you can see how things are going to look with the mobile. And again, with Squarespace, they make these adjustments themselves with the template. So you don't have to really worry about that at all, which is very, very nice. So this is the content side of these types of platforms. And then most of them also have a design side. And so the ones that are more locked into the templates, you're going to be making a lot of the general changes to the site in a design section. And then those are things that happen and are applied globally throughout the template. So for example, let me bring this back to this preview. So with this template, you have a color palette, and then you can go through and edit that. So let's say I want this yellow to be blue. Oops. Okay. So then I save that. So that's going to apply that change to every single page. In the site. And then you change things like the fonts. So you have font packs, and then you're able to change those. And you have these where it says like global textiles. That's where you can make that change in one spot, and then it applies it to the entire template. So it's definitely, and this is where these platforms can really save a lot of time. If you are liking the template, and once you get a good set of styles kind of set, then let's say you have 40 pages, and you decide, oh, I want the heading text to be different on each of these pages, or like I want to apply this change to all of these pages. You can do that in one spot, and it applies it across every single page that you have. So that is really a huge time saver. And the issue is, and the thing that makes it a little bit harder, is if you want to have a different font on every single page, and you want it to be specific to each type of page, then you're going to have to go in, and in some cases that is impossible. In some cases you just have to go in and kind of customize that, and that takes a little bit more know-how. So that's kind of the drawback. It's like you have less flexibility and ability to customize every single page of your site, but you're able to apply changes universally very quickly. So it really just depends on like how much control you want to have over these templates and over each of the individual elements of things. So Wix is really similar. So let me jump to Wix, and let's go here. So here's their list of templates. And there's a lot of similarities between Wix and Squarespace. And I think that both are really good options. And let me grab this one. So I'm going to work with this one. So this is thinking. Okay, great. So you see like, again, like a really similar system where you have content, menus and pages. You're able to add different pages, and that's going to change the way that the menu works. You're able to implement different backgrounds. And then you are able to add in these different blocks. So you have buttons, galleries, image blocks, text, strips of image and text, social. So this though, there's definitely a lot more variety within these libraries. So you're able to do a lot more in Wix. You're able to customize things a lot more. You're able to apply kind of more customization to individual pages. The drawback with that though is that you are not able to apply. There's less kind of global changes that you can make, and when you are working with lots of different custom elements, it can start to get a little bit more complex. So it's, I think that with Squarespace, things can be a little bit more cohesive without a lot of effort. So where did that go? Huh. Oh, here we go. So for example, let me edit this really fast. I'm going to put a button in here. And that button is, so there's a couple of options for the button. Like you can make it small, you can make it large, you can change the alignment, but there aren't the same number of styles. So you compare that to, sorry, the control thing on the Zoom is in the way of the, there we go. Where did, okay. So here, if I'm trying to add a button, I can choose from all of these. So more flexibility, more ability to customize, lots more options, but then you're not able to then change the style of a button across an entire site. And things can easily become a little bit less cohesive. And Squarespace makes it hard to kind of break away and not be cohesive, almost to a fault, because you're kind of locked into the template, and then just the variety of the smaller libraries of options in Squarespace. Wix kind of goes to the other direction, where you have so many different options that you might be using. You could potentially have a different button style on every single page. So that's great if you want to have that variety and that flexibility. It's just there's a lot more to keep track of. So it's definitely a lot more flexible. You can customize things a lot more. You can play around with layouts a lot more as well. And then that is, again, you have a lot more unique pages. You can have more complexity, but that is going to add a level of complexity when it comes to switching to the mobile platform. And so if you don't break away from the template options in Wix, then the transition to mobile is pretty seamless. It's really similar to Squarespace. As soon as you start adding like a lot of customizations and breaking away from the original template designs, then you have to start setting up the behavior and the different formats for every single page in mobile. So, and that again is just, you have more flexibility in how it looks. Ultimately, you can you customize things a lot more, but then you will have the added step of needing to make these adjustments and dictate new behaviors for it to work in mobile. And the mobile thing, I think is a huge, it is, I think, very important, because people are looking at sites a lot of times on their phone, and or just kind of on the go. And so it's something where someone might look at it first on their phone and then say, oh, I want to look at this more closely, and then go onto the screen. But I think that flexibility is is pretty crucial with these types of platforms and with portfolio sites in general. Okay, and then let me jump back to here. So, and then I just want to make sure, can people see the presentation page again?
Yeah, it's showing.
Okay, great, cool. Okay, so then we have Wix, and then I just want to make sure I'm getting to everything here. So Wix also has a free option, and it is a little bit lower cost, even with the paid options than Squarespace is. And then some of the cons of Wix are just some things to consider. Responsive designs, because of the customization abilities, they might need to be adapted. You might, it's a little bit harder to create a cohesive site once you start working with a lot of different customization. And then there's also a lot of add-ons. Wix feels a little bit more consumer driven, and that's both from the different options they offer to users, but then also just kind of their way of organizing and prioritizing things. So you can like add on like an email option, or add on like a commerce option, or add on like a scheduling option. So it can get a little bit, there's definitely a lot of different add-ons with Wix. Squarespace has like less, again, kind of less options, but their plans are a little bit more defined. So you basically have like 3 or 4 plans that you can purchase with different levels of abilities within each plan, like different steps. Wix, you can kind of like be a little bit more selective with those things. So then I want to talk about Cargo, because so a couple folks were asking about it, and I hadn't worked with it a lot. A collaborator I work with, though, was really interested in it when Squarespace kind of started doing a lot more with their templates. And so I wanted to explore it a little bit. So Cargo, their templates are really unique. They have a very interesting way of editing. So it isn't quite the drag and drop. And I think that's it just, depending upon your workflow and the way that you like to design things, you might like that more than the drag and drop style with Squarespace and Wix. And then they were kind of built to be art and design and like portfolio specific. So they were not looking at commerce. They were not looking at like restaurant websites. They really were built, the portfolios were for artists and for creatives. And so they, and for a while, I guess it was invite only, which I think is really interesting. And then they also have this, they have the lower cost in general, and they also have a free option. So with them, and so this is kind of like neutral here. They have the shift from like the desktop version to the mobile version. You kind of have to, you just basically like create a different design for that. There is some automation there, but you are kind of designing 2 things. And then the template designs themselves, it has a pretty strong viewpoint, which is great if it matches with your work, but you just want to be aware of that and make sure that the designs that they have available match and complement your work. And overall, there is a community built in, but I think just because they are artist and designer focused, there isn't just the same kind of like number of folks that utilize this template. So let me switch to it. Another thing that's interesting with Cargo is that it doesn't work in Firefox. So I have to switch to Safari. So with these, I just going through them and looking at the templates themselves, there is definitely kind of a change. Like I do think that these have a slightly more design, slightly more stylized look than the Wix or Squarespace options. And things are a little bit less straightforward, standard. And so there is a little bit more focus on the design of the container itself. And again, that if that fits with your work, that's great. Because I do think that these visuals are compelling still. You know, these are really interesting designs. You just want to make sure that they work with your visuals and your ideas. And so let me jump. Let's see here. I think, yeah, I can jump here. And because I want to show folks the kind of the difference here. Let's see, we have work, make, play. Oh. Play. Oh, that's because I already made that. Okay. So this is also, the back end of this is a little bit more straightforward, which I like. You have your content, so you have your pages, you have your home page, and then you can add things here. And then you're able to change things page by page. And so this doesn't apply to things globally to the template, but instead of working with that idea of like blocks, it works with columns in this really weird way. I mean, it's not weird, it's really interesting. So you're able to create these interesting layouts by changing the number of columns. And then you can change, and then you're just essentially kind of adding in new sections. But everything is kind of driven by, columns. And so, and I mean, you do have blocks that you're able to add in. So you're adding in a text and image block, and you're adding in different elements. But instead of working with spacing, you are kind of generating these different designs based on the placement of columns and then padding. And then you can also, this is where you're having to kind of adjust these things for mobile. So let me discard those and then go back to the design. So there are some global things that you can change. So like the headings, and then like different like thumbnails and how they appear, how an image is going to appear. And those things are going to populate throughout the entire site. But then the changes that you make to each of the pages is very specific to those pages. And so you can change the font that's used in the body text, is what they call it, throughout the entire site. But you can't really like decide, oh, I'm going to have all of the pages follow a 3-column format once you make those changes. So I just think that that is a really interesting way to approach this type of plug and play and this type of kind of this backend system, because it is just different than how Wix and Squarespace work. So, and this also, if you have worked with web design before and you work with CSS and HTML and you understand those languages and how those different elements kind of work together, then this backend might make a little bit more sense to you, and because it's a little bit more closely related to how you can create layouts with CSS, kind of going from the HTML, and how you can kind of create these really complex layouts with CSS. So that's, I think this is definitely an interesting option for folks who have that kind of background working with HTML and CSS. It's also the other thing I like about Cargo is that the templates, they are designed and they do have a little bit more of like compelling designs to them. So if you find one that fits with your work really well, like you maybe don't have to do a lot of customization, but then you still have a really unique looking portfolio site. Okay. And then let me go back to here. And then some folks were also asking about Adobe Portfolio. And so this is really similar to Squarespace. I actually think that they might have, oops, sorry. I think that they might have just looked at Squarespace and Wix. I mean, definitely Squarespace especially, it's like, even though like how it's like pages and design on the left-hand side, I think that they kind of just like decided to copy that completely. So the backend interface is really similar to Squarespace, and it's kind of the same thing where there's less customization options, but so you're able to make changes and apply them to the site across the entire site more easily. But then you have less flexibility with individual pages and how they look. One thing I really like about this option is that you get the templates and they're not preloaded with images. So it makes it really easy to visualize just the template without someone else's visuals inside of it. So that's a nice kind of asset there. But the big issue with this is that there's no migration options and it's free, or it comes with Adobe CC. And I know that everyone has Adobe CC right now through the school. But as soon as that goes away, if that goes away, then you lose access to your site. So I think you can get an annual plan where you have access to this along with Photoshop and Lightroom, and that if you pay for that per the year, it's something like $10 or $20 a month. But at that point, I think that it just makes more sense to pay for Wix or for Squarespace, because I think you can't send this from one Adobe account to another Adobe account. They're tied to whatever Adobe account you make it in, which is unfortunate. So you're kind of locked in to your to paying for Adobe CC in order to be able to use this. So that definitely, if you know that you're going to be subscribing to Adobe for the rest of your careers, then this could be a good option. But it is not great if you are not sure if you're going to keep working with Adobe or not. And it also has the least number of options available between all the other platforms, just because it is kind of attached to Adobe. So you just have less kind of ability to bring in social. You're not able to add as many things on. The commerce seems a little bit clunkier. And I think that they do have they have solid template designs, but they just don't have that many. So it definitely seems like it is a great option if you know that you're going to be working with, you're going to be subscribing to Adobe, and you just want to start with something and you don't want to purchase like a whole other account. But it's not great if you're not really invested in working with Adobe and you're just using it because you happen to have it available for like the next couple of months. Okay, so before I move on to the other platforms, I just want to see if anyone has any questions about these. Any questions?
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is more of having like a personal website. As you go from, say, maybe your as you move from maybe one content page to another, from your experience, have you have you come across any websites such that when you move from one content page to another, the template changes very much? I imagine you wouldn't be able to do this with, say, like Squarespace or Wix, but I personally would like to make my own website, and I was just asking if I was just wondering if it's considered okay or best practice, or I don't know. Have you ever do you understand what I'm asking?
So are you?
So I don't know if I'm clear.
No, it's okay. I think you're asking, is this, can you go from, or is it wanting to do something that's complete, like not working with a platform?
Yeah, this is not a platform specific question. What you talk on picking website templates that ties in with your story. You talked about how when you talk about your storyboard, it's important to ask yourself whether you want more text and few images or more images and less text.
Mhm.
And I was asking, to clarify, let's say you have a website, let's say you are a professor and you have your CV, you have your research, and maybe perhaps you have a blog, right? Of course, the template for each specific content would vary, and so I was just wondering if you've sort of come across websites that sort of change in template or style as you go from, say, one content page to another.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think with the approach to the portfolio that you have, and I think, can you mute yourself, because there's like some feedback that's happening, I think. But then, of course, if you have more questions after I address this. This is a great question. So this is the idea of having the story behind your work, and choosing a template that fits your story, and also kind of fits your work. You might have a variety of work, and so that totally, maybe you work with photography, and then you also have animation, or maybe, depending upon what different projects you're working with, you might have totally different styles, because you have to change the style to be appropriate to, a client that you're working with. And this is something that I come across a lot, because I work with a range of clients. And so like there's always, my style that goes into the work, but it's also has to be something that works for the client and is branded to the client as well. And so that's where you want to have a design overall for your portfolio that can complement the majority of your work, even if that work has really different styles within it. And this really relates back to what I was saying with the design of the template itself. The more kind of design that goes into these templates, and the more that you're kind of noticing the template versus noticing the content, the more the more complicated that that presentation can be, because you're not only are you trying to create cohesion across a large variety of your own work, if that is then also you're trying to tie that together with a template that has like a really strong viewpoint or a really strong kind of visual style, it can get really complicated. So if you're someone that has a really wide variety of work, then I think it makes more sense to have a design that's a little bit more minimal, so that it allows you to just you just don't want to be then trying to kind of make every single page different and kind of fit that work. Does that help address that question?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So any other questions about these different platforms? Okay, great. And then let me move in to talking about hybrid social platforms. And so a lot of folks were asking about ArtStation last week. And so I definitely wanted to address this along with some other ones. And so these are like these interesting combos of like just like a regular web platform like we've been looking at, and then social media, where you're able to have like an account and a page potentially within that account, and these are crafted around art and design and creative things. ArtStation is really interesting too because you're able to explore different categories, and then there's also there's like classes, and it's really interesting, and I think that's a really interesting design, and just an idea in general for like a social media portfolio platform, creative platform. So the drawbacks with these, well, actually, let me talk about why these are great. So these are built around showing work. So they really kind of take a lot of these design questions out of the equation, because the company is building these in order to make them ideal for sharing, for not only presenting work, but also sharing work. And they're built around creating that community. So you're not having to worry about choosing a template, working with font sets. It's all kind of done for you. And then you're also having access to a large community, and there's like a visual language that is shared throughout these communities. So when you're working in ArtStation or you're working in Behance or in Dribbble, you have your work, and then everyone like is accessing that work in the same way. So all the menus are the same. Like the way that you're able to view someone else's work, that's exactly how someone else is going to view your work. So there's that visual kind of navigation, that language. It's standard across the platform, which I think is really, really helpful, especially if you're trying to present that work to a company that is asking for that. So if you have, if you're applying for a job and then you're talking to one of the recruiters and they say, oh yeah, we ask for folks to just send us a link to their ArtStation portfolio or their Behance portfolio, that they know how to navigate that platform. So it takes all of those, all that architecture and all that design out of your hands. And it also takes that question out of it, because if a company is using that to look at work, that they know how to navigate and how to use that platform. The drawback with that is that you're not really able to craft your story. you're not really able to decide how to present your work because you don't have control over that. So there's a standard way of viewing work with these platforms, and there's a community of people that know how to navigate the platforms. So it just basically takes that authorship out of your hands. So you're not really able to, the story of your work has to just come through the content itself and not how you're presenting it. So those are just kind of the drawbacks there. So that being said, I would never recommend that you only use one of these platforms. If you're applying to a company that says we use this, yes, definitely have your portfolio page. If that's like the first company you're applying to or the first studio you're applying to, don't spend a bunch of time making a portfolio site. Focus on this type of platform first. If you're interested in applying to a lot of different places, then I would say focus on the portfolio, and then also if you have information about a company that uses one of these or is recommending that folks put their work on that, then definitely select that one, or just think about this as like a secondary thing. It's definitely, you have a lot more exposure with this too. Your portfolio is just living in a portfolio world and it's in its own kind of web presence. And Cargo is a little bit different because it does seem like Cargo really tries to create a sense of community between people that are using their that platform, because it's really art and designer focused and creative focused. And then these hybrid social platforms are really strong with the community and that exposure. So you're on Dribbble, you know that there's a lot of other creatives looking at your work. So you have that community already. It's just, it just doesn't allow you to tell your story the same way that a portfolio site does. So ideally both, and then if you can only have one, then definitely go with a portfolio site, unless you're only applying to one place and they say, oh, we use this, or we use like this platform specifically. So any questions on that? And on the differences here? Oops. Hold on. That was not what I was trying to do. Oh, here we go. And I think that I have ArtStation up here. So, and I mean, I think what's also great about this, obviously, you have the community there, and you can just see so many other people's work. And you also know that people are interacting with this the same way. So the whole community is seeing the same thing. They know this visual language. They know how to navigate this space, and so you are able to really focus on the work with these platforms. And then I really like how they have you're able to have access to different blogs. You have the learning element here. So definitely worth looking into. And I know that Behance, they are tied to Adobe. So you can see some really great things that are made using Adobe products. So I would definitely recommend utilizing that when you have access to Adobe CC. And it's also just being able to see what other people are doing and using this also as a source of inspiration, which I think is another great way to work with these types of like hybrid platforms and portfolio spaces. Yeah, this is a great question. So I definitely recommend, think about this less as a backup, these types of hybrid platforms as a backup. It's just a different use. So if you only have time to work on one, unless you're only applying to one company or one studio that specifically says we only like look at ArtStation portfolios, we only look at Behance portfolios, then I would recommend focusing on the portfolio, a portfolio site and not one of these. But I do think that there's some really great applications for it. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be all focused on trying to get a job or apply for a grant. So there, I think that there's like a interesting exploration element with these platforms, a great community element. There's a lot of inspiration that can happen with these. So maybe, maybe you're on ArtStation to progress as an artist or a designer. And then that also comes with developing a portfolio, your own portfolio website. But I think this can be a little bit of a quicker kind of positive outcomes. So yeah, I mean, I don't want folks to feel like this is like a less than thing. I just think it's a slightly different, there's slightly different applications for this type of hybrid platform. Okay. And then, yeah, so we have this. Now let me go back here. Just a couple more things I want to talk about. So, and this brings up social integration. So this is looking at social, just strictly social media channels, things like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, Twitch. So you're thinking about these as with things like Insta, it's not as specialized as like Dribbble and Behance and ArtStation as a social media platform. They are really focused in on creative content, art and design focused. You can even further kind of categorize things. Things like Insta and YouTube and even Twitch to some extent, those, you're dealing with a lot of different types of content. So it's not just artists and designers that are on those platforms. So when you're thinking about developing these things, maybe you're going to have a portfolio website and then just an Instagram that's tied with that. Because you're more interested in having the Instagram kind of potentially be exposed to a wider variety of users. There's a lot more kind of general type users on Instagram than you would find on like Dribbble or ArtStation. So those are the types of questions you can ask too. If you, again, like if you have your portfolio website and then you're trying to decide, do I do something on Behance or do I do something just on Instagram? I think that these are the considerations you want to have. Like, who is your audience? Do you want to have a wider audience or do you want to have a more specialized audience? The drawbacks with having, or a positive to having a kind of widespread audience is that you might pull in someone that you would never find on like a more specialized site. So, you have some animations that you're posting on Instagram. And then you have just kind of a general user over here who's like, oh, those are really rad. And then they're like, oh, I work at this company. I'm not in the creative side of things, but I know people in the creative side of things. Let's, bring that focus there. So you have a lot of potential for wider exposure with the more expansive social media platforms that you don't necessarily have with the specialized platforms. So just those are some things to think about if you're trying to decide between one or the other. And another thing, most of the so Wix, Squarespace, those don't really have like a way of integrating ArtStation portfolios or Behance. They might have Behance, but I don't know. Adobe's kind of a little bit proprietary with their stuff. But they do have easy ways to link in an Instagram or YouTube. And so that's just another thing to consider. It's very easy to integrate Instagram into a lot of the Squarespace templates. And so that can be another way to keep content a little bit more up to date. As you know, you might be adding things to your Instagram a little bit more quickly than you would add things to your portfolio site. But if you're able to integrate the two, then you're able to kind of refresh that a lot more. So yeah, for the last workshop, we're going to be looking just at shaping content. So we've kind of started with the story, and then this is the platform. And then in the last one, I really just want to be able to answer questions about, you know, how do I show my work? You know, what types of images should I have for this type of work that I'm producing? A lot of you who are working with Playable Media, you know, how do you document that? How do you present that in like a portfolio website? And there's lots of different ways to do that. So I'm going to go into some approaches for that. And then also really for the last workshop, I want that to be as interactive as possible. So just folks who maybe, you know, if you have questions about this, then let's bring them and we can kind of talk about different approaches and strategies for shaping your content, presenting your content. How do you document things that are interactive? How do you document installations? And just looking at all the ways that you can show your work, not through the platform, but through the actual work itself. So yeah, for workshop 3, I would, for the next week, experiment with some different platforms. You get a little starter pack going with just like some sample work that you have, and then start plugging those into some of these different templates and these different platforms, and just you know, play around with how they work and how they function. And that can start to and I think for next week, I think it'd be great if we could look at people's progress, you know, deciding on a platform, starting to bring your work into it. And then we can start talking about, again, more strategies and methods for actually documenting different projects. And then I think there's going to be at least one creative person, creative professional joining us on next Friday. So they're going to be able to kind of look at what folks are doing in progress and just kind of give some feedback about it. And then also can look, and we can kind of work with them to see what some of their strategies might be for how, you know, how does a design studio show all their different projects in a way that's cohesive and still kind of looks at the specifics of things that are styled really differently. So I think that'll be another great perspective and viewpoint to have for next week. So any questions about what we went over today? Any questions? Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen, for doing a great job today. And sorry, everyone, that we had a little Zoom link mix up.
I'm so
we
sorry
all got. Oh, no. We'll check that out for next weekend and just make sure, next week, make sure we're good to go. But I'm glad you all were able to jump on and listen in. And just a friendly reminder, we are recording these sessions, so we will be sharing them via email to everyone that registered. And I will make sure to get the first 2 recordings out by Monday, so that way by the 3rd session, you have time to kind of review everything over again. And then, as I've been posting in the chat, we have a quick survey. We were going to do a post poll, but since we had to move Zooms, I just created a quick survey for you all. And if you could fill that out, that would be great. But yeah, thank you. And if you have any other questions, you can always email me. I'll drop my email in the chat and we'll go from there.
Oh yeah, I also wanted to say I wasn't able to, I had a little technical issue with the Canvas, but I'm going to be setting up the Canvas site. So everyone who's registered this week and last week will receive an invite. And then I think we can post the videos there. And then I can also post these slides as well for folks to be able to review.
Love it. That sounds great. And
Great.
we'll be in touch with all of you about that as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Friday and a happy weekend. It's nice and sunny, hopefully wherever you are as well. Have a good day.
All right, goodbye, everyone.
I have a couple of questions that I'll just continue to answer as folks are taking off. So if you already have an ArtStation portfolio and you've been working on it a lot, then I think what I would suggest is you have almost everything there. So you could potentially take that, try to find a template that's really similar to what you're working with in ArtStation, something that fits the navigation too, and then just kind of work. Basically, if you like that design and the way that folks are able to navigate it, you could just try to find a template that matches that, and then that'll just give you a little bit. I think it can be good to be able to send your own site to folks, and just promote yourself in a slightly different way and just have both options. And you can just take the elements that you like from ArtStation and just try to find a template that will fit it. There's definitely, I think, some really good options on Wix and on Squarespace that you could use. And then let me make sure. Okay, great. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Kristen, we'll talk next week, maybe log in early on that other meeting just to make sure we're good to go.
Okay, yeah. It was really weird.